Hi, this is Miss Vanoy, and I'm here today to talk to you all about a skill that is very near and dear to my heart. Um, what happens a lot is that we come from elementary school and the beginning of middle school, and we're so proud of ourselves because we can write these full sentences, we can write full paragraphs, we know all these words, we know big words, and we students often want to just throw all of that in, and it's not necessarily wrong. There are complete sentences there. The words are correct. It's just maybe not the best way to do it. And that's what I think middle school in general is a lot of it is about. It's taking all those skills that you've learned in elementary school and so on, and then you take it up to the middle school and you learn like, okay, this may be the right way to do it, but it may not be the best way to do it. Like, how do I tweak my writing where it's the best it can possibly be? And the number one rule when you write is you want to communicate to your reader. And that's why I say this is very near and dear to my heart, because as an adult, there is nothing that drives me crazier than when I get things like emails or letters or just any kind of like written document that's got way too many words. The way the world works right now is everything's so quick and fast, and you don't have a whole lot of time to you should never have to decipher what you're reading. Now, there is a time and a place for beautiful, fluffy language, if you will, for figurative language. There is a time and a place for that. But for the majority of the kind of writing we do, we want to make sure that we clean it up and we make it as concise and as clear as possible. And one of the most important ways to do that is to eliminate any kind of wordiness that we have. This goes right along with seventh grades, lesson 3 and 4, but it's something that's important for all of us to be talking about. Now, first of all, you want to know what wordiness even is. It's something that really weighs down your writing. It can make it more confusing to the reader. It's something that it's just like adding stuff that you don't necessarily need, or you're being redundant, which means you're repeating yourself. It's important in the editing and revising stages, especially, to go back through and make sure you have made it all the cuts that you can possibly make. If a word is not needed, you don't need to have it in there. You only want to put things that are absolutely essential. If not, it ends up being like blah, 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 blah. The words that you're getting rid of, I want to make this clear, are not bad words. They're not incorrect. It's just that they're not the best and they're not maybe needed. And that's really important for you now, the older you get, to realize the difference between those ones that are essential and the ones that aren't. Now, this little creature over here is a weasel, and I've heard through some of the research I've done, I've heard people say that they call them, you need to get rid of things like weasel words, which are the words that kind of like, it's like weaseling your way out of making like a firm statement. You know how it is when you say something and you want to make it clear and you want to stand behind it and you want to sound confident. Words like, sort of, kind of, maybe, perhaps, might, can, all those kind of words, that just makes you seem a little bit more uncertain. And some people will write like that because they want to always have an out, to be like, like a slimy politician, maybe like a weaselly politician, where they can say, well, that's not exactly what I meant. And they put these kind of words in there so that there leaves some room to kind of like, oh, well, let me change my mind on this. So when you write something, though, you want to be confident and stand behind your writing, and you want to make sure that you don't have words like this. So one of the things you'll do, tip 1, is go through it and make sure you don't have those little weaselly words in there. Tip 2, so let me go to tip 2, is you want to avoid excessive adverbs. Now, in plain speak, what that means is adverbs are like adjectives that describe your verb. So any of these words like really or very or suddenly or seriously, they're not always needed. Sometimes it's like, well, you don't have to say, I really, really, really want something. Like, that's not needed. It's kind of like, it's like when you avoid adverbs, it's like, salt and pepper. You only need a little bit. It's good to have a little bit of salt and pepper. It's good to have some adverbs, to have some description, some adjectives for your verbs, your action words, but you only need a little of it, just a little bit of salt and pepper. So think of it like that. Tip 3 is anything that starts with there are, there is. Now, I know a lot of the text frames that I preach and talk to you about start with these kind of boring sentence starters. And that's why eventually you're going to stop saying, I know this because, or there is this in the text. You're going to be able to eliminate that when you get better at writing, because it's not wrong to start that way. It's just not the best way to start. So eventually you'll get to that point. Once you've mastered something, you can go on to the next step to make it even better. in simple terms, it's just boring to start things out like that. Anything that starts with words like it or here or there, and it's going to be followed by something like a to be verb, are, is, that just makes, it's just too many words. And even sometimes if you can save yourself from writing one extra word that's not needed, it makes your writing so much stronger. You also want to avoid any excessive punctuation. Again, I see this with students who are so proud of themselves. They've figured out what a semicolon is. They've figured out how to use a dash. And those things are wonderful. I've got a bad habit myself of putting too many dashes in writing. I have to always go back and edit for that. But you want to make sure, like the salt and pepper thing is, you don't need too much of it. The most important thing is you have a variety of sentences. And when I say variety, I don't want to get too, I'm not getting all technical. I mean, it's as simple as look at your paper. Do you have long sentences and do you have some short sentences? Do you have them all mixed up together? That's important to make sure that you have to avoid wordiness. You also want to avoid negative words. And sometimes this can almost be like a riddle. I remember years ago, they talked to us as teachers that we needed to not have negative words in like classroom rules. So you kind of have to think of things backwards, especially if you're used to always saying, don't do this, or you can't do this, or you shouldn't. Instead, you want to try your best to turn all those negative words that you may have in your writing and put it into like a positive form. So instead of you can't write with a pen, you could say, you must write with a pencil. Like try to turn it into something positive. And along those lines of avoiding negative words is avoiding passive voice. And guys, passive voice and active voice was something I heard about for years in school, and I really didn't have a clue what it meant. I remember my dad, who's a writer, he would review or revise my papers for me and look at them and give me feedback. And he would always say, Hillary, you're writing way too much in passive voice. You've got to change into active. And it frustrated me because okay, if I knew how to change it into active, I would. I don't even really understand what that means. Passive voice can be confusing because it plain uses way more words than active voice does. Active voice, again, going back to those Weasley words too, it just sounds more positive, like you're sure of yourself. And if you're writing something and you want to communicate to somebody, you want to make sure that you come across as very confident, as knowledgeable. So you want to use language that backs that up. Like, for example, passive voice would be the hamburger was eaten by Jill. To make it active, you'd say Jill ate the hamburger. That's just way too many words and makes your head kind of, you're thinking about the hamburger first, then you're thinking about Jill. You cut out two very unnecessary words and you cleared up confusion when you took it from passive voice to active voice. All right, and now you want to avoid excessively fancy words too. There's this scene on Friends where, I don't know if you all have seen it, but it's where Joey writes an adoption letter for Chandler and Monica, and he is so proud of himself for figuring out how to use the thesaurus, and he's putting all these big words in because he thinks, well, big words make you sound smarter. But if you put too many of these big words, or I've heard them like 50 or $10, I don't know, I can't think of the old saying, but like these big words into your writing, it can make it confusing. Now, there's going to be exceptions to that, and we'll talk about that later on, but I want you to realize that the most important thing that you can do is to communicate as effectively and clearly as possible. Your readers should never have to be like, what, huh? For the most part, for the most practical types of writing we do, they shouldn't have to get a dictionary to look up what words are. So I've got this over here. If you want to watch this later, you can look at Word Choice Friends, the adoption letter, because it really does hit exactly what I'm talking about there. On tip 8, you want to avoid the word thing. It's as simple as that. Thing is not specific enough. If you use the word thing, it doesn't give us a very clear picture of what you're talking about. All right. Now, this is kind of a motto I've always had. I'd sometimes like to say I came up with it, but I doubt I did. I don't know where I heard it. But I've always thought it's so important to write what you mean, and you've got to mean what you write. Show, don't tell. And if you're showing it, do it in the shortest way possible. You want to slash anything that you don't have to absolutely need to say. Like I said, this is a near and dear lesson to my heart because as an adult, I can't stand it when other adults write, and they write well, and they're writing, using beautiful words, and words are beautiful. I get it, but they're writing so much that it's hard to even figure out exactly what needs to be communicated. So yes, figurative language and fancy words, they have they have a place, but it's just not necessarily something you need in most everyday writing. George Orwell is a very famous author. He wrote the book 1984, An Animal Farm, which you'll read in high school. And he wrote in this essay, Politics in the English Language, that to never use a metaphor or a simile when it's a word that you're used to seeing in print. If you're just trying to communicate effectively, you don't want to make an everyday word something so convoluted or special, like with this figure of language with a metaphor that the reader gets confused in what you're even trying to communicate. You want to use metaphors and similes and figures of speech as maybe more for words that people don't know as well, so that when you explain it in a different way, they do understand it better. Never use a long word when a short one will do. You don't have to make all these short words long. It's okay to have some small words. It's okay to have some short sentences. If you can cut the word out, cut it out. Again, never use passive voice when you can use active. And never use a big word to something that if you can think of like the everyday equivalent of it. So if it's something like simple like breakfast or dinner or whatever, you don't have to come up with some big fancy way to say breakfast or dinner. You can just use those everyday words. And then number 6, which is important, and I'm going to go on to the next slide with it, is you're going to break these rules too. You have to trust your own judgment. It's like I always say, you got to know the rules before you break the rules. So it's really important to know how to write those long sentences and how to use a thesaurus and come up with big words. Those things are important because sometimes you will need that. But once you've mastered that, now you know how to kind of break those rules sometimes. Here's how you get rid of some of those wordiness. Just because it is a nice fancy word doesn't mean you need it. But then you know what? You got to use your own judgment. Maybe you're writing something scientific and they need that scientific vocabulary in there. And that's totally appropriate for you to use. So again, you want to polish your writing up as much as you can, but you've also got to trust your own judgment. Now, here's some examples that I can kind of go through to show you about how to make your writing more precise and concise instead of too wordy. I guess the positive or the active voice would be to say positive and precise and concise. Okay, so if you've ever had an assignment like this where they say, okay, look at these 2 paragraphs and tell me what is better about it, or why is the second paragraph better? If you have no idea how to approach this, this is what I would do. And this is just the common sense way. It's not coming up with some big fancy ELA language. I would literally look sentence by sentence and see, well, what's different about sentence 1 in the first one and what's different about sentence 1 in the second one. And then when I look at that, I start to understand how some of the how there's maybe more words in the very first one. I mean, just glancing at it, you can tell the first paragraph is longer than the second paragraph. And we've been so programmed to think that longer is better, that's sometimes kind of a hard transition for us to make, but it's an important one. That what's the most important thing is that you you communicate clearly to whoever your reader is. All right, so what I did was I simply just went through it and I highlighted the words, you can see on this slide, that were different from the second one. I know the second one's supposed to be the better one, and the reason why is because they've got sentences like, for instance, on sentence number 2, it says, first I went to a sporting goods store to buy some boots for hiking. We can change that into first I went to Sports R Us to buy hiking boots. Number 1, we see that there's less words, but it's also more specific. Instead of saying I went to a sporting goods store and use all those different words, you're able to use the specific name of the sporting goods store. So it is actually more descriptive and more to the point. If you look down on sentence 6, the very last one, even though it was a really busy, crowded day, I enjoyed it because I found the shoes I wanted and got to eat my favorite snack. A way to edit that is instead of saying even and really, which are those weaselly, sneaky words, you can take those out, or not. They're like the adverbs that you don't need. Take those out, and then the part where it says, I found the shoes I wanted, just tell me what you wanted. I bought my hiking boots. So it just be more straight and into the active voice and more deliberate. Here are some more practice things that you can look at. For instance, I'll look at this sentence right here. I won't go through every one of them, but this sentence right here says, it's very unusual to find someone who has never told a deliberate lie on purpose. Well, one of the things about wordy sentences is that you're going to find that people will write these wordy sentences with too many words, and those too many words are just kind of like repeating things they've already said. Well, a lie is deliberate. So you don't have to repeat that word. And on purpose is just extra information that's not really necessary. And again, we've got that word very unusual. You could say it's unusual to find someone who's never told a lie. That would be less words and more specific and to the point. All right, so this last slide, of course, has some credit. This is where I did a lot of my research to put these tips together that would work best for you guys at Garrett Middle School. And I hope this helped. If you need any more help, don't hesitate to contact or call me. And I'll hopefully get to see you soon or hear from you soon. Have a great day. Thanks.